All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first session of our CX strategy series. This is going to be a three-part series that is going to explore how forward-thinking organizations are going beyond AI experimentation to deliver measurable results. I am Sneha. I head the business value and the analytics team here at Observe, and I'm going to be the moderator for this conversation today. Throughout the three sessions, we're going to be joined by our CEO, Swapnil Jain, and our guest experts, Deann Moore, former VP of Change Management at Asurion, and David Wilson, founder of Impactify. Before we get into today's topic, I do want to pass it over to Swapnil to introduce himself and our amazing guests.
Thank you, Sneha. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm Swapnil. I'm the founder and CEO of Observe.AI. I have with me two amazing guests today. Deann Moore, who is a former VP of Change Management at Asurion. I think one of the key things that we hear in with our prospects and customers all the time is they hear a lot about AI hype on AI could do this, AI could do that. But I think they often struggle with this, like, where do I start? What do I need to change in my company? What roles? What people? And I think Deann has done an incredible job at running change management at Asurion and rolling out all the amazing AI technologies that she will talk about today. Deann, thank you so much for joining.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
We also have David Wilson on the group here, and I think welcome, David. Thank you so much for joining. A quick intro on David. David is a former customer service leader at world's best brands, I would say, companies like DoorDash, Chime, Capital One. He built and led large customer service teams at scale. And so his expertise that you will hear from today is, to your point, Sneha, not just thinking about AI for experimentation, but AI in large scale setup. How do you deploy when you have hundreds, thousands, and tens of thousands of agents globally dealing with multiple governance systems, multiple privacy laws, and then bring that change to life. So David, thank you again, and welcome to the webinar.
Great to be here. Excited to have this conversation.
Yeah, this is going to be an incredible discussion. So let's get right to it, right? So I think session one of the series is going to be focused on understanding why customer service is the hotbed for AI agents. Now, we know that AI is touching every function, but it looks like customer service particularly has become this proving ground. We're seeing billions of dollars in investments, pouring in from tech giants, from enterprises alike. But the bigger question is, why is customer service uniquely suited for AI transformation? And I think that's the question I want to kick this discussion off with. So would love to hear perspectives from Deann, David, Swapnil, all of you on why is AI agents exploding in the CX space today?
Yeah, no, maybe I'll kick it off, and then obviously we want to hear perspectives from operators in this session today. But I think you're right. I think if I go back to just customer service and industry, it's a $400 billion global spend. So it's a pretty large spend globally, with roughly, you guys correct me, but like 20 million agents, all over the world. And so it's a pretty large market, right? But the most interesting thing is, AI in customer service is not new. I think we all are aware of what happened with chat. We are all aware of what happened with chatbots, right, in the last decade. So we have seen multiple waves of so-called AI and transformation in customer service, but this one feels different. To your point, Sneha, we are seeing billions of dollars of investment in new companies, new startups, new enterprises, large enterprises, right? Everyone money is flowing in. So this one feels different, right? And maybe the reason this feels different is because this time we can actually see the ROI. We can actually see the impact on the ground floor that AI is bringing to operations, to customer experience and compliance. So with that in mind, maybe Deann, I'll ask you this question to get us started, right?
Sure.
You obviously implemented AI at Asurion to improve the agent performance, right, at scale. Maybe talk us about, from your perspective, why do you think at this point it just feels like there's a big hype around AI is going to transform customer service? What has changed? Why is it such a hotbed from your perspective?
I think we have run customer service teams for years, somewhat blind. You're talking about millions and millions of transactions, and historically, those transactions, we're doing quality checks on maybe 3 or 4 transactions per agent per month, which is a really small sample. And that doesn't allow you to really impact change in a meaningful way. And oftentimes when you're doing the sampling, you're so far away from the original transaction that it's hard to go back and make any meaningful change. So I think the ability to really get eyes and have visibility into the millions and millions of transactions, they help you in several ways. There's high turnover typically in the call center environment. And so getting from a ramp to proficiency, getting new agents in and getting them on the phones and being productive and delivering on a great experience, really shortening that timeline down is a huge ROI in and of itself. But the broad picture is really getting true eyes on and true actual data into what's happening on the millions of transactions, I think is the really big aha when AI came out.
Perfect. No, Deann, and thank you. So your one viewpoint that we are agreeing to is now you can analyze large amounts of data, which was just not
Absolutely.
possible before, right? And that's why enterprises are leaning in and spending money. David, I'll ask you the other view of this, right? So of course, Deann shared a perspective of analyzing data to improve processes and change the behavior of agents. But there's the other side of AI and the impact it can have, which is actual automation of the interactions itself, right? Which is also
Yeah.
could be huge ROI if you do that. So, but that is not new problem. I mean, chatbots have existed for a while, right? All kinds of bots have come and gone. What is different this time? What is AI doing differently in
Yeah.
resolving those customer queries?
I probably think of a few reasons here. I think the first one is, the quality of the output is different today than it would have been 2 or 3 years ago. Even, my last role, we started off trying to come up with some good just first turns in a conversation, and the results were awful. I think that, the quality now of chatbot and even voice interactions is so much better. I think it's definitely more of an option for companies to have faith that it actually will work. I also think that the volume of companies that actually do this today is another thing. Like if you think about a few years ago, the companies were just emerging. Now the amount of companies that are doing it, and I think about the BPO industry and specifically, I think a lot of those companies have really pivoted their own operations to embrace AI as a separate unit and like a revenue stream for them that they weren't doing before. Like mostly they were focused on internal operations and they became really good at doing that. And so I think it's just natural for a lot of companies to move into that. And then the last thing I might say is our tolerance as a public has actually changed. Like I think in some of the leadership development workshops that I have led recently, I always ask the same question, which is, how many of you are using AI on a daily basis? And most hands go up in a room now. And so I think that the output is understood by people. They know that sometimes there's a little wonkiness about it, but our own tolerance has actually changed. And so companies are probably willing to take a chance that AI will actually work for them because like every time I put something into ChatGPT, I get, yeah, that's a very smart answer. So, I think, we're kind of loving the AI just a little bit.
I know I agree with that, right? And I think picking on that theme, one of the key things that we see from enterprises, right? And maybe you both spoke about the ROI, right? Is one of the reasons why it feels that CX is hard for AI right now because we can show ROI in a meaningful way, in a faster way. So, for example, David, you said that all these people use AI, but if you ask them, so what's the ROI? They'll be like, I'm more productive, and you're like, what do you mean? And they're like, I'm more productive, and you're like, so how much dollar you are making or saving more? And they don't have an answer, right? So a lot of the AI productivity tools, we still don't quite have the ROI, but in
Mm.
customer service and contact center, you can actually have very quantifiable ROI in terms of number of interactions that were handled by AI and contained by AI. Okay, that's a lot of dollars. AHT reduction, if you're running a sales program, number of leads closed, number of sales made, right? So it's the operational nature of contact center makes it very easy to quantify ROI. So I would love to hear from both of you that is that also a big part of the reason why people love to try and implement AI first in CX and any other function because it's easy to quantify ROI? And maybe we'll start with David with you this time.
Well, look, I think in some cases we also have to be patient because I don't think the ROI is immediately obvious, but I actually think that, some companies lack the patience to get there, and they have to understand that this is a journey. And what is it though? It's a marathon, not a sprint. But I think that it can be there. I think some companies probably need to think about how they're actually going into it. But listen, if we could even get rid of my last company, if we could even get rid of 10% of those interactions on an annual basis, you're saving $1 million a year. That's pretty tangible. It's a small drop in a large bucket, to be honest with you, but it's still hope that it can actually get done. I think the challenge with the ROI that you're talking about here is some of it may not be so obvious. And I think, for instance, this may be a little too esoteric, but I think of the AI and CX work is it's very cognitive rather than physical. So there's a lot of data that will be divined from it. That's not something that we have if you're sampling less than 1% of your interactions on a regular basis. If I could have access to 100% of interactions, then I could really build a feedback engine. And that kind of that feedback to other areas of the business is way more, how can I say it, reliable. And I think that other teams will look at it as more solid than just us going to them and saying, hey, this widget needs turned a quarter to the left, and we'll get way more CSAT out of it. I think that there's that trust. It gives us that trust that's actually I think is really important. So look, I think that the other non necessarily obvious ROI is consistency. I struggled with consistency like all of us did, probably who have large networks, having the same answer from one team to the next, even within a team, even with how they research the information. Like if you've ever used Solonis, you see how many paths people can actually get to the same answer within a process map. But I think that it was always a goal of mine to have consistency be my key, that I knew that I was actually giving, so I can get consistency from the answers that humans give, but the chatbots and the AI bots themselves will, hopefully by definition, be consistent. So your customers get consistency out of you too. That make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Deann, I think you spoke about ROI in the first question, right? So is that also a big reason why contact center and customer service ends up being the first place where people think about applying AI? Because hey, ROI is obvious because it's a very operational world in customer service.
Yeah, I think so, yes, in short, but I think if you take that a little bit deeper, it's a place that we have digitized years ago, right? We've had a lot of data years ago. We've had data, but we didn't know what to do with it. I mean, we tried to do things with it, but we weren't really able to mine the data to really understand what's going on. And I'm just going to make this real simple. Most interactions are two things. It's an agent and it's customer, right? And there's a lot of people trying to make that interaction, every single interaction, better. And very few of them listen to an interaction or have watched an interaction or have taken an interaction. So when you can really bring that to life, David, your point of informing other parts of the business is a huge one, right? Because the truth is in the interaction. If the interaction is your service, the truth is really in between whoever handled the interaction and the customer, right? And so say all that to the ROI, because that's really where, in the world that David and I played in, that's really where a huge part of the call center is, right? It's in people on the other end of interactions, and you're talking millions and millions of interactions. And so I think, yes, that makes it very ripe for this is a place to start. Also, really small changes come with big dollars and have really big impact, to David's point. He talked about, it amazes people when you talk about if you could just take 1 second off the millions of dollars that's worth. And so that, I think it's the exponential ROI you can get from really small changes, which is one of the reasons that I believe I believe the contact center is really a great place to implement the AI early in the strategy.
Deann, you said one thing which I'll come back to, which is contact centers have digitized themselves and have the data, which is obviously a key need for AI to work. So I'll come back to that, but I want to hear from Sneha. Sneha, you do a lot of our work with our customers on building ROI models and business cases, right, to really drive a transformation.
Yeah.
From your perspective, do you feel that it's easier in customer service to justify ROI because it's so operational than maybe some other functions in a company where productivity could be very ambiguous in nature, right? Hey, I'm using ChatGPT to summarize my email. Okay, so are you making more money or are you saving some cost? Hard to say, but in contact center, it's easier. How much do you think that that plays a role in AI being CX being a hotbed for AI right now?
So I think I wouldn't say yes, it's definitely become a lot easier with the application of AI to different use cases, but that also does not take away from the fact that there are certain, nuances or complex use cases where proving ROI continues to be more of a soft cost than a hard cost. And to David's point earlier, I think a lot of our customers, they heavily underestimate the impact of the soft cost of, AI application on the CX use cases. There are a lot of use cases like, can I improve resolution rate? Easy to understand. What's my, cost savings associated with just shaving off 10 seconds, from the call? Easy to understand. Are my agents able to take 10% more calls than they used to before? So these kind of use cases, very easy to prove ROI. So I almost feel like the quick wins kind of have a cascading effect on people wanting to explore more capabilities. But the other aspect to why I personally think CX is the hotbed is, and this goes back to Deann's point, right? I think traditionally a lot of the customer service teams have operated in the dark. Now they've been sampling 2%, 3% calls, but now that we have visibility into that 100%, it does multiple things for us. One, with all that historical information, we can now diagnose the root cause of all the problems that we have. Two, with that information, we can also proactively prescribe, what needs to change in the organization. Three, you can also now leverage all of this data with AI to predict what your customer journey is going to look like. So that entire prescriptive and diagnostic, capabilities that we have now at our hands, it's serving as this whole new intelligence layer for the entire organization. And that's one of the biggest reasons why I think CX is becoming the hotbed too.
And can I build off that too? Because I think Deann, I don't know about your own experience, but I feel like the last point that you made there is super important because that intelligence that we can get from your actual customer behavior supersedes any engineer sitting in a room thinking, you know what, I should turn the widget 1/4 to left because it would be cool. I appreciate your opinion, but I'd rather have really like hard factual data that can show me what can actually be done. And honestly, like that is so rich. Like if you have hundreds of thousands of conversations to divine from, I mean, the change that you can do just from the outcome of your customer conversations that is true ROI right there. Have your actual experience improved by the actual feedback that your customers give, and that's what you can get out of, a really great quality platform. Well, like Observe, for instance, like you guys have and like so much more data, and I felt so much more confident about presenting that data to others on the team because it was organized in a nice fashion and there were really good conclusions, and that kind of feedback is taken more seriously, if that makes sense.
Absolutely does, David. Thank you. Deann, I'll go back to data point. I think we're obviously talking a lot about data, right? And you made the point that for AI to work and for us to deploy all these amazing applications, it needs data for the initial fine tuning, testing, and obviously not every department in a company, not every function in a company is necessarily on cloud or has digitized themselves or as data is readily available, but maybe it's in customer service. So maybe give us a view on how much of data readiness plays a role that, let's apply AI in this department and in this function CX because the data is ready versus other functions, data is all over and we can't really make a big change just yet.
Yeah, I mean, that's even, we've always talked about junk in, junk out, right? And when you're trying to stitch together data in the fashion that we have in this day and age, if you can't stitch it together and there are disparate teams or systems that don't speak to one another, trying to truly pull the data together in a meaningful fashion, that makes the use of AI much more challenging. So I think I've seen it in the places where we have the data and the data is connected and we can absolutely stitch it together in a meaningful way, puts you ahead of the curve and allows you to really leverage AI more quickly. It has a huge impact on where you deploy, how quickly you can deploy, how well you can even understand where your opportunities might be. Because step one might be getting the data to a point where you can even go find out where the ROI might be, right? What use cases can be leveraged here to leverage AI to get to it. And again, you take out a lot of subjectiveness, nature of a lot of opinions, if you will, and the places where you truly have data and you have experts like Observe or others that can take that data, stitch it together, and help you really identify the opportunities, and then leverage the tools in a way that will enhance the experience and bring some value and some efficiencies. Makes a huge difference.
Hey,
Makes
could
total
I
sense.
add on? Because Deann, spot on. And I would say I would add a different, like another element to this, which is process maturity.
Oh yeah.
I've worked, with AI, with, your junk in, I would call it garbage in, garbage out. And it was certainly our experience, I'll just say early on in my last role, because we weren't giving, it was a couple of things. It was because we weren't giving the greatest of the conversations and feeding that into the models themselves. They were giving us back responses that I would look at and from a quality perspective say, that sucks. But when we started to feed in the very best of our conversations, then what we were getting were way more realistic AI output. And so I think that the processes themselves also have to be mature enough that you can say, look, processes can always be improved upon, but you're at that point where there's no black holes, there's no gaps in your process, there's no broken processes, there's no dead end processes. Then, you don't have your AI model trying to invent things and give back $10,000 refunds when a dollar would have been more appropriate because you didn't provide them with an answer. And all of a sudden you're in big trouble, and so is your AI. And so, like, I think about the Klarna example
Yeah.
last couple of years ago. They came out strong and said, "We're not hiring any agents." And I'm like, "Good for you. Let's see how long it lasts." It didn't. And I've not been on the inside, but I would place a large bet that some of it has to do with process readiness and just understanding what's beyond the 80 of the 80/20, because you're going to have a tough time with the 20, but you still have to do a great job on the 80 to build trust within your own organization that it's something you should pursue.
I
Yeah.
agree. I think, Sneha, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say, I think this is I fully agree with the points that both Deann and David made. Just talking about these are some of the operational challenges that come with, implementing AI and CX, right? And so now I think we've established that yes, CX is the front line, it is the hotbed for AI. We're seeing that data readiness, is an operational gap there. We're seeing process maturity is an operational gap there. And Swapnil, I'm sure you have some questions to ask, but I'm just curious to understand that now that, we have the ability to decouple the cost of service versus the quality of service, what other operational challenges, are leaders like all of you tasked with when it comes to deploying AI and CX? And sorry to cut you off, Swapnil. Yeah, just wanted to, put that in there, but I know you had something to say right after the conversation, so go ahead.
No, let's hear from both of them. Right, as I think about AI, right, there's the cost element, there's the quality element. What are the other big considerations that go in implementing AI in CX?
Deanne, do you want to start?
Well, I mean, I can, and I spent a majority of my career in change management of some form and fashion. And I think the last time we spoke, Sneha, we talked a lot around change management of AI. And, one of the things I'm reminded of is it's really about adoption, right? Let's get AI in place, but adoption is what really drives it. And I used this quote last time we talked about it, but many people want to sprint to the start line, and the start line's awesome, and getting something in place is awesome, but you get no value until it's adopted, right? So it's really the finish line that you can't take your eye off of. And so, a couple of things I think about with AI. Sneha, if I'm going in the wrong direction, just course correct me here, but I think it's around buy-in. It's a lot understanding and trust. It's about transparency and communication and bringing teams along on the journey. It's about really communicating effectively to make sure people, the the immediate reaction to everyone on AI is it's going to take my job.
Yeah.
It just is. That's just the immediate reaction. And so really owning that and hearing that and understanding and bringing the team along with you, it will help you adopt it much quicker. And not just adopt it, to be honest, it will help you leverage AI in a fashion that is much more effective, because uh, some members of teams think they really know what's going on, but the people that really know what's going on are the people that are in the trenches, whether that's the frontline agent or the coaches and the customers, and really leveraging and being open to deploy AI in a way, in a fashion that is reality, and not something that, strategically it sounds great, but when you really get into it and you understand, you will have a path that you think you're going to leverage, and you will probably end somewhere different if you're willing to be open and listen. I think that's what we experienced, and I think that, that's most any change and most any technology. I've been implementing technologies for years, and the people who come in and say, okay, now make all these modifications to do just what we do today. I'm like, okay, well, that's good, but why did why are you hiring us, and why are you putting a solution in place if you want to replicate what you're doing today? You really want to understand where does it need to go and be open to that. And again, buy-in from all levels of deploying AI and how you're using it, and a great feedback loop from anyone who's using the technology as well as your customer base is vital.
Mm. Big plus one to that. Like, I think I would say participation is required and desired by the teams that wouldn't necessarily think to include, say, the customer support organization. Deanne, I don't know about your own personal experience, but I think what most people don't get, and engineers and folks and everything, I don't think they understand the ugliness of their own processes and products that customer service covers for, with just our ability to be more flexible and try to resolve on the front. Like, I think I've heard so many times people say, "Why do your customer service teams suck?" And I think, you know what? If we had better process. And so bring the customer support team into this, give them a leading role, not just a seat at the table, but make them lead, because I actually think that makes the most sense. Who better than to help design stuff for your customers than the people who service them every day? I would also say the one thing, Sneha, that what I would have done differently is structuring the team. I didn't have that expertise on the team. And I think it showed in the slow progress that we made. And I feel like if I maybe done more, and I would advise people, if you can do more, to bring in folks that are like excited about it, interested, give them some education, pay for it yourself, because you'll see ROI on that for sure. And I think two other things that I think of real quick. One is, don't boil the ocean. Like,
Right.
take the chunks that are immediately due. I was working with a company last year trying to help them understand their operation, and they were working with a chatbot team. Everybody was super excited about it. They were, we're going to do this with AI, and then I did a bit of analysis on it for them, and I found that that their overall contacts had a less than 10% resolution rate.
Oh, wow.
And I think while they were all excited, I don't think they were looking at the data. And I said to them, "Do you understand? Like, 90% of the time, your AI bot is not working." And so I laid out a plan to say, "Here, look, if you look at these contact types themselves, this kind of makes sense to just take these three. You're going through nodes anyway, so the chances are your app is going to give them, will allow you to have an AI experience for just this particular contact type. Get good at that." Once you do, then you've got the learnings that you can take to take on some other ones. And just a funny note, The best performing contact type that they had at over 50% was cancel my account.
Of
Probably
course.
not the one that you
Wow.
really want. But because it was a very simple process, and again, I go back to process maturity. They can only solve it if they cover all their own. And then one last plug, if I may, and
Oh
that
yeah.
is this is an opportunity for personalization on a really large scale.
Mm.
Like I think, if I'm on the phone and I'm talking to a customer, of course I'm going to personalize, but you can personalize within the AI experience as well. It's got so much information. It tells me it can understand if I've actually just purchased something and maybe what the actual problem is, or what's the connection to any searching I'm doing on your website. Like all of this stuff is super important. And if I hear that right away, as soon as the interaction starts, I feel way more supported and understood, and empathetically, I feel like you're there in my shoes. If I have an agent who's like, yeah, just give me but let me put you on hold for 2 minutes so I can search your answer, and then you disconnect from me, then I actually lose you as an agent, lose that connection to the person that you're speaking with. And so the trust level immediately goes down. You don't know me. And I think this is an opportunity that AI has that, I don't know, a 10, 20,000 person agent workforce can't possibly compete with.
Totally. Maybe I'll bring up the elephant in the room.
Uh-oh.
Right. One of the
Uh,
big things that customer service leaders deal with every year is, as part of the budget planning comes the mandate, we got to cut cost. Our customer service is expensive. This year we have a mandate to reduce by 10%, 20%, and so on. So how much of this AI buzz that we are seeing in customer service is driven by either the management's desire, board's desire to see customer service as a cost center and say, you know what, whenever we hear the word cost center, AI is great because it's going to be much cheaper. Forget about the experience and the quality. So give us your views on, one, is that how other leaders are thinking about it, which is, hey, whenever we hear the cost pressure, let's bring in AI. And second, how do other leaders and operators balance this notion of cutting cost versus the quality of the service, right? Because if you cut costs, sure, right, but if your quality of service goes down, I mean, your retention is going to be bad, your ARPU is going to be bad, and eventually, you will have this bad customer experience, and customers are not going to buy from you. So help us break that. Maybe Deann will start with you on this balance of
yeah.
cost reduction versus quality.
Yeah, I would probably choose to disagree with part of what you said there at the end, Swapnil, which was, hey, if that goes down, the experience is going to get worse type thing. Because what I would say is there are a lot of the volume and a lot of the call percentage that you take is not, a human being is not adding a lot of value into that
Okay.
interaction, right? And so I might, as a consumer, prefer to go through something automated and get to an answer quicker. I might view that as a better customer experience. While now I've saved the company money because AI has handled that call, I, as a customer, am happier as well. And so I choose to think that there's a win-win here. You can cut costs, you can improve the experience. And I do think what you're saying is where most people's mind goes is if we automate that, our experience is going to degrade. And I would say that's not always reality because there are many call types out there that are repetitive, that are low value. You bring in a agent, you train them how to handle all the things. They're really equipped for the hard ones, and then they spend 70% of their time on the easy call types. And when they get that hard one, they really
Yeah.
need to personalize. They don't do it often enough to be really good at it. So, I think that what AI has allowed is a real opportunity for more personalization with the customer from the agent because you leave, um, you point humans at where they add value
Yeah.
versus where I'm just going and checking the boxes and adding transactions. So that's the way I think about it. I
Love
feel
that
like
perspective.
I feel like it doesn't have to be a trade-off of experience. It should be an additive to experience if done well.
I love that perspective actually, right? I think oftentimes we hear, and this goes back to also the ROI conversation we were having before, right? Like oftentimes, whenever we hear the word AI, our first reaction is, okay, it must reduce some cost somewhere. right? Either to your point, the human agent cost, we don't need these many agents, or AHT cost or quality cost, right? But oftentimes the real benefit is coming from better customer experience, long-term retention, higher ARPU, and so on and so forth. Right? It's a great viewpoint. David, curious to hear your thoughts on this topic.
Yeah, like I think I'm there with Deann. Like I've always been the one that felt like even if look, going back to my Capital One days 20 plus years ago, there was an expectation that I was going to save 7% off my budget every year, and I did it somehow. And a lot of that was, again, if I go back to the process maturity, I was able to cut my budget every year, even though we were growing. And so I think that. Look, we've been dealing with the fact of AI is going to lose my take away my job now for more than just AI. When IVRs came out, apparently it was going to be the death of the call center,
Yeah.
and then we switched to RPA and automation, not AI but automation, and that was going to be my job. Look, the reality is, yeah, it is going to cut some of the easy stuff out. That's the reality, and we all have to deal with that. But as far as I know from the BPO industry, it still continues to grow year over year. And so all those jobs are not dying. I think it's just more volume is coming into it. And so what I would say is embrace the AI aspect of this, because what you could do if we go back to the 80/20 of this,
Yeah.
and I can get rid of a whole bunch of change my address. I mean, that's a really simple example, but I think that's one way of reducing the cost. And do I really want to deal with those interactions anyway? Probably not. But then it's how might I actually reinvest some of the savings that I'm getting from the reduction by adding on those the flexibility into the processes somewhere upstream, and invest more in helping your frontline agents who typically don't handle escalations, give them that job now, right? Like I think this then shifts for work from, say, the US to the Philippines, where now they have the ability to make those decisions because you know what? And I think about, look, the food delivery business, a lot of that work is refunds. But
Yep.
the agents themselves on the front line are stuck to scripts and tight policy because they can't necessarily give any flexibility themselves. But what if your own system had AI-ness built into it that actually during the actual conversation, knowing where the conversation is coming from, because again, it goes through the nodes and the node says this client wants a refund. I would much prefer as an agent to have a comfortable conversation facilitated by the fact that your system now is using AI, looked at my history, looked at what I bought
Yeah.
today, gave me, here's what you can have as a refund offer to the customer right away. And now it feels, to Deann's point, now this is personalized. It's not just $10 for everybody. It's $20 for Deann, $100 for Sneha, and nothing for Swapnil because he calls me every day and I know that and he's just trying to fraud the system.
No, I think that, David, you brought up one very strong point, which we'll cover in the next session, which is the whole concept of, the actual solutions and applications of AI to make the lives of these people better. I have one final question. You referenced that, David, a little bit, like, which is workforce, right? Which is, there's also customer service is very unique in a way where it's a 40% attrition industry.
Mm.
The reality also is that it's not the most well-paid industry either. The other reality is you see a lot of younger folks in call center who are maybe just coming out of college, maybe didn't go to college, right? So all that makes the customer service workforce, right, and the challenge is a lot more acute. I think, Deann, you referenced, like, you're always constantly hiring and training and so on. So how much of this workforce challenge also plays a role in saying, you know what, let's use AI here, because this is the characteristics of this workforce makes it most appealing for AI. And Sneha, maybe we would love to hear your thoughts too. You work with a lot of our customers, right? You've visited call centers, you have, met agents, met supervisors. How much of you feel like the workforce characteristics plays a role in saying, you know what, this is the hotbed for AI. Let's just implement AI first here because these people need the most help.
Yeah, it definitely plays a huge role. And again, it's two sides of the coin, right? So there are a lot of, companies where the agents and the workforce itself is championing the use or leverage of AI within their processes and workflows. But then there are also companies where, to Deann's point, there's this fear of, oh, if I start leveraging AI, I'm not going to have a job tomorrow. And so there's resistance and pushback on let's not use this. But in general, I think when we're talking about the workforce itself, there's still a role that needs to be that the workforce plays in terms of more than the workforce. I would say the leadership needs to play a role in the mindset shift, right, for this workforce. And the reason for that is we're so ingrained about a legacy mindset of, oh, we've been following certain scripts for a while. It has to be rigid adherence to so many different things. And so when AI is now smart enough to understand the context and provide reasoning behind it, it might actually give you synonymous results, but the expectation is, oh, I want it hard coded to exactly what I've seen in the past, right? So I think that's where the biggest challenge for workforce adoption of AI is. If we can cross that barrier, then I think it's a win-win.
Awesome. Deann?
Yeah, I was just thinking, for my 15 years in the call center environment, if anything, I heard more frontline agents wanting you to help me do my job better, right? And so I think better tools, better information, understand my customer better, empower me to take care of my customers. Like the majority of people really want to do a good job for their customers, and they want their job to be doable. And oftentimes, some of the things that I have seen is that's a really hard job, because sometimes there's disparate systems. And so I'm like, okay, I got to go to this system, I'll have this, I got to go to this system, I have this. And now I use them, we made them the middleware. We made frontline experts the middleware. We make that job a lot harder than many people around the organization realize. And so I think I know that getting frontline experts and leadership on board of how AI can help them and supplement the tools or supplement the knowledge they have of the customer, or give me information when I need it at the right time. I really think that can help a ton with adoption and kind of clearing the roadmap of executing on an AI strategy.
I love that. Yeah.
David, curious to hear your perspective.
Yeah, I think AI should be the warm blanket. I think that's what it should be, surrounding the agent on the front line. Like, I don't know very many jobs that would have the ability to help me understand from data how I'm doing every day after every interaction. And I think it is possible with AI. I know I never had a job like that, but I think that it really does help. It would likely help with attrition. As you started off this conversation with, your average, I'm not going to, let me just say, your average attrition in a BPO today is probably somewhere between 70 and 120%. You're basically replacing your entire workforce every year. Now, look, 50% will stay. I'm just talking about absolute numbers. And what that does is it puts a 15% drag on your KPIs in any month, because you have people in various stages of ramp that are impacting your overall stats. And so I would say I would feel more supported. Therefore, I will likely stay longer if I had access to that information. And then, because I work a lot with Africa today, Africa's challenge is what we're talking about, exacerbated at a huge scale. There's an intent to add almost 1 million jobs into the BPO industry on the continent of Africa in the next 5 years. Hoping it happens. But that brings its own challenges, because it's not just about the frontline agent. It's also about, how do you have an informed team leader for those teams? You're talking about 1 week you come in as an agent, and the next week you're a team lead without any training and especially any access to information. One of the leadership development series is for team leaders, and we'd spend a whole day on data where I'm showing them techniques that I'm thinking, I can barely do an Excel spreadsheet pivot table. And these folks are so starving for information to help them lead their teams and lead the individuals individually. If you could arm them through AI options within management software, I just think it is just, then they're way more supported. And look, those roles are only going to go if the team of 15 leads. And so everybody is way more supported through that whole journey.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And Swapnil, I know you specifically were talking about like the agent workforce population. I do want to touch, based on the frontline, the supervisor side of the workforce too, because to Deann's point earlier about, hey, we have, a lot of these agents, they want their lives to be made easier, right? Which is true. And David, to your point, like a lot of these supervisors, they're starving for information.
Yep.
What we've also seen with, a lot of the prospects and customers that I work with is that I did say that on the agent side, mindset shift needs to be a little bit more, but on the supervisor side, the interesting trend that we're noticing now is people who were only focused on quality before are now coming to us. They're so enamored by all these AI capabilities, and they're like, okay, tell us, what are your top performers doing? Tell us what other metrics we should be chasing. Like, what other information can you give me? Tell me what I don't know, right? So it's almost pushed them into thinking beyond their comfort zone. And I think that's the beauty of CX, right? You have so many different use cases, not just, okay, we're going to target AI for one KPI within a company, but even think about it from a thought leadership perspective. Like you can have multiple healthcare customers, multiple retail customers, all tracking similar KPIs with similar nuances. Now you can have an AI marketplace of like, all the almost a playbook of, hey, this is
Yeah.
exactly what's going to work well for you. So I think that's also the beauty of this.
Awesome. I know we are coming at time. Sneha, anything else that you want to cover?
I don't have any other questions from my end. Do you have any, Swapnil?
No, this was great. I think some of my key takeaways, right? I think the quote is, "The truth is in the interaction." Don't quote me; it's from Deann Moore. So make sure you guys give credit to her. But I think the larger theme that I got is, yes, there's a lot of AI happening in CX, and it makes a great place for AI because of large amounts of data, repetitive workflows, right, and the ability to provide better customer experience. But none of this is possible unless we get our processes, our knowledge, and third that I heard was adoption right. If these three things are not there, then of course we can talk at a very high level in spreadsheets and slides a lot of AI. The reality is not going to happen. So that's my takeaway from today's conversation.
Yeah. So I'll just wrap it up, right? So yes, CX is the hotbed. I think it's pretty clear to everybody here. We did establish how AI has shifted from the rigid, bots to reasoning agents. Swapnil, you talked about repeatable workflows. Deann, you talked about data. David, you talked about consistency. So these are all different reasons why, AI is the hotbed for CX. Sorry, CX is the hotbed for AI, my bad. We also acknowledge that, the leaders who are tasked with implementing this deployment or implementation, they are under a lot of pressure for various reasons. We talked about a lot of those operational reasons too. To relieve that pressure safely, right? The key actually is targeting impact areas like self-service, agent assist, quality insights. And I think this is the portion that we're going to be focusing on as part of our, next session, where we're going to dive deeper into where does AI actually help bring in that transformation? What are the different use cases? What are the different types of AI solutions for each of those use cases? So CX is undeniably, the front line for this transformation. So I think for the audience, we want you all to, join us right back next week to dive deeper. Again, it's going to be the same set of folks here. We're going to have Swapnil as the host. Deann and David are going to be our experts who are going to be providing a lot more information on that topic. But Deann, David, Swapnil, thank you so much for taking the time to have this incredible discussion with us today. Any last words from you, Swapnil, Deann?
No, thank you, Deann. Thank you, David. Thank you so much. Amazing to hear operator perspectives. I think we talk a lot about technology and software and AI, but it was kind of great to hear from the ground floor on how AI actually gets implemented. So thank you.
Yeah.
You're welcome. Thank you all for having me.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.